Hello all and welcome to Broadside, a channel built around highlighting history in video games. Today we are diving back into Assassin's Creed 3 and listening into some of the pieces of background dialogue written for the heralds. There are quite a lot of these to cover, and they vary greatly in content from just a taste of world building to accurate news items that people at that time would recognize. Let's get into it.
The Boston Weekly Advertiser! Get it here!
Let's talk about the story of the Boston Weekly Advertiser. According to the King's Handbook of Boston by Moses King, and I quote, "While the Boston Weekly Advertiser, begun in 1757, loyally sustained the British government during that struggle and closed its career with the war." But that doesn't really tell the whole story. Let's jump back to August 1757, when, according to the history of printing in America, John Green and Joseph Russell founded this paper as the Boston Weekly Advertiser. Now, I cannot ascribe the feelings of these two, but we do know that from 1759 to 1763, they altered this title to be Green and Russell's Boston Postboy and Advertiser, before changing it to the Boston Postboy and Advertiser from 1763 to 1769, and finally landed on the Massachusetts Gazette and the Boston Postboy and Advertiser between the years 1769 and 1775. Not exactly sure why they changed the name, but they were very fickle apparently. After their partnership was formed, Russell ended up opening an auction office, the profits of which went into the firm. According to the history of printing, Green managed the printing while Russell handled the auction room, and they remained in partnership up until 1775. The two would go separate ways as the revolution kicked off. Green would eventually pass away in 1787 at the age of 60, and Russell in 1795 at the age of 61. But what happened to their paper? The story of this paper continues with Nathaniel Mills and John Hicks. They formed a similar co-partnership under the firm Mills and Hicks. They were very creative. And they were urged by partisans of the government to purchase printing materials and Green and Russell's rights to this paper, the Boston Weekly Advertiser. They did so and opened a printing house in April 1773, and found support by the British loyalists and featured views to match that audience. By the time April 1775 came around, though, hostilities began and the paper ceased operations. Mills left and then returned back to Boston with Hicks until the city was evacuated by British troops. They followed the British Army up to Halifax and eventually moved to Great Britain before returning to occupied New York. The pair became a quad with Alexander and James Robertson and published the Royal American Gazette while in that city. They operated in New York City until 1783 when peace came, and Mills and Hicks then returned to Halifax before dissolving their partnership. Not to throw shade, but according to the history of printing, Green and Russell's version of the paper was, quote, a rather dull recorder of common occurrences, and, quote, its publishers, although instigated by printing for the custom house and by other profitable work for government, did not appear to take an active part in it. According to this resource, Green and Russell were asked/told to resign by Thomas Hutchinson, who at times was the governor of Massachusetts Bay. Thomas Hutchinson's interest in the paper was basically to allow for better control of the message in the colonies during this tumultuous time. Mills and Hicks would give a boost in the propaganda arm of the British, and this even included officers who were encouraged to write and inspire stories. Their version of the paper was going to be completely different, pro-British. Notably, Hicks' father was one of the first who fell in this war at the Battle of Concord on the American side, on the revolutionary side. But Hicks remained loyal to the British forces. Despite this, he ended his life in Newton, Massachusetts, despite the fact that he was supporting the British and the British were eventually thrown out. In early April 1775, between the 10th and the 17th, we know that issue number 921 came out, and that this would be the last printed copy of the paper. On April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord unfolded, and the American Revolutionary War began. Boston would see turmoil and outright fighting over the course of the next few years as the colonies sought to overthrow the very people who sought to control the Boston Weekly Advertiser. And that does it for our deep dive into one of the Herald comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe for more similar content, and check back next time for more absolutely too far in-depth stories on Herald talk in Assassin's Creed.